Hello and welcome. It is time to conclude our series on The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. This is the third video and it's going to be titled Morality Binds and Blinds. So in this section of the book, Jonathan Haidt really synthesizes everything, and it's a very complex section, so I'll have to read from the book quite a bit just to remember all the details because the nuance is important. But the central metaphor for the chapter is that we are 90% chimp and 10% bee. So by that specifically, he means that we share, in general, this isn't a specific claim exactly, that we are literally 90% chimp in terms of genetics or whatever else, or behaviors, but that in a lot of ways we behave like chimps, but we're groupish and hive-minded like bees to some extent that allows us as humans, as opposed to apes or chimps, to cooperate in a way that is very altruistic, even if fundamentally we're selfish. He of course talks about glaucon and kind of selfishness as this book is a sort of justification or vindication of glaucon in Plato's writing. So first off, this is group selection. We'll start with group selection, which is something that stuck with me more than a lot of the book. One of the more important aspects to me, because he talks about David Sloan Wilson and E.O. Wilson, who are both biologists and who are kind of vindicators of group selection in biology. Haidt talks about in the book Richard Dawkins in his Selfish Gene book and memes, biological memes, and kind of the sort of traditional approach now that or idea that humans are fundamentally selfish, which Haidt agrees with, but that because we're selfish and for other reasons, group selection, so evolutionary change doesn't happen at the group level. It's all about individual selection, and that in the traditional view, that manifests as change in groups as well. So one of the main problems with group selection is the free rider problem, because in this framing, it's difficult to see how a group of individuals who are selfish would work together and put forth energy for the benefit of the group, give other people things when you can have that for yourself. And so that is the free rider problem, that there are going to be people who are selfish and who see an opportunity to be selfish, not cooperate, not put effort into the group's goals, and therefore kind of be a free rider and have the group take them to their goals, to the free rider's goals as well, even though they don't put up as much effort as anyone else. So, which is where also we see fairness as a foundation. And so one of the first, you could say, milestone arguments against group selection was the sort of herd of fast deer conceptualization of group or multi-level selection, in which it was argued that a group or a group of animals, like you could look at a herd of deer and see that you could say that if a group of deer that is fast in general is outpacing their predators and therefore surviving when a group of slower deer wouldn't survive because they can't outrun their predators, then that would be group level selection, and therefore, because that group is so much better than the other group, that group is going to disseminate its genes, be more likely to disseminate its genes, and therefore the genes will go on to through the evolutionary process, but the slower groups won't. And so the argument against this, against group selection, is that really, if you look at that group, all you would see is that it's a group of fast deer. It's not necessarily that the group itself has evolved, but more that on average, the group is, each individual deer is faster than on average each individual deer in the slow group. And so if we really want to look at group selection, we would find, in order to actually define group selection, it would be something like each deer has its own role in the herd and partake or performs that goal in order for the group's survival as opposed to their own survival. But really what we see in a herd of deer is that each deer is running from a predator to save its own life or that of its kin, and therefore group selection doesn't exist. And it isn't that it's not plausible, it's that it doesn't happen in nature. But the problem with that in Haidt's mind, and I think of E.O. Wilson's mind or David Sloan Wilson, is that we do actually see that with humans, which is why we can kind of think of humans as evolving in group selection and other species as well. So like, for example, bees, they have a queen, they have worker bees, they have whatever else, I don't know, bee family structure, but there are certain roles that they perform, or like ants, there are certain roles that they perform that is for the good of the group. And humans, obviously, we have people who, like on my university campus, we have police officers who protect students, we have professors who instruct students, we have students who are there to learn, we have custodial staff who are there who keep the place clean to provide an optimal work environment. And so we each have our own role in the university as an institution, and with that, it's not necessarily to provide the institution always, for at least students, it's generally not that you're trying to help the institution, but for a lot of faculty, a lot of custodial staff, the benefit is that you're there for some expanse of your career, and you're helping the students within the university, which make up the university itself, to improve and grow and prosper. And so more generally, we see that with society. We have so many roles and jobs, and we all kind of work together in a way to better the economy, better the chances of survival and of thriving for other people that aren't just in our immediate family. So he gives 4 exhibits as to why this might be the case, why groups multi-level selection might be the case on 254. So the first is that major transitions produce organisms. The history of life on Earth shows repeated examples of major transitions. When the free rider problem is muted at one level of the biological hierarchy, larger and more powerful vehicles, superorganisms, arise at the next level up in the hierarchy, with new properties such as a division of labor, cooperation, and altruism within the group. Exhibit B, shared intentionality generates moral matrices. The Rubicon crossing that let our ancestors function so well in their groups was the emergence of the uniquely human ability to share intentions and other mental representations. This ability enabled early humans to collaborate, divide labor, and develop shared norms for judging each other's behavior. These shared norms were the beginning of the moral matrices that govern our social lives today. Exhibit C. Genes and cultures co-evolve. Once our ancestors crossed the Rubicon and began to share intentions, our evolution became a two-stranded affair. People created new customs, norms, and institutions that altered the degree to which many groupish traits were adaptive. In particular, gene-culture coevolution gave us a set of tribal instincts. We love to mark group membership, and then we cooperate preferentially with members of our group. Exhibit D. Evolution can be fast. Human evolution did not stop or slow down 50,000 years ago. It sped up. Gene culture coevolution reached a fever pitch during the last 12,000 years. We can't just examine modern-day hunter-gatherers and assume that they represent universal human nature as it was locked into place 50,000 years ago. Periods of massive environmental change, as occurred between 70,000 and 140,000 years ago, and cultural change, as occurred during the Holocene era, should figure more prominently in our attempts to understand who we are and how we got our righteous minds. So those are summaries of the general pieces of evidence that suggest that we do, in fact, perform multi-level selection, group selection. And from this, he goes to what he calls the Hive Switch. The Hive Switch is the switch from being a chimp to a bee in this central metaphor. So basically, for the most part, we are generally selfish. But in certain circumstances, we can become groupish to the degree that we lose ourself to an extent. So like one of the first examples he gives is of soldiers in war, specifically in a Roman phalanx, which is a formation that certain groups of Roman soldiers would form into. And he talks about how some individuals report, like when you're performing marching drills or something, that you're doing something in unison with a large group of people, you kind of end up losing your sense of self in the group, and you feel like you are the group. Another example is raves. So taking psychedelics or something else, methamphetamine and amphetamines, and then like dancing around in these psychedelic laser shows and stuff like that with other people, dancing and stuff. People report feeling like they've lost that kind of self-identity and instead identify with the group as one large organism that is doing the same thing. And so this is the Hive Switch that really kind of suggests to him how groupish we can be if we do things correctly. And so he also, kind of building off of that, argues against the new atheists, who are intellectuals who, if you're not aware, argue that religion is a sort of parasite, is a parasite and also developed out of psychological mechanisms. But the problem with religion as a psychological mechanism or a manifestation of these mechanisms is that it also leads people to do horrible things. So if you're familiar with Sam Harris, he's a new atheist, and he has been vocal in arguing against Islam for many years now, and as he thinks that Islam is particularly susceptible to, or Muslims within the faith are particularly susceptible to engaging in jihad and really abhorrent behavior. But in Haidt's view, he agrees that religion is a manifestation of psychological mechanisms, but that it's not that it's a parasite, but it's actually helpful. And so, as opposed to new atheists who view religion as being a parasite that is inherently hurtful, Haidt sees these hive switches and such, and these other good benefits of religion, and says, hey, actually, the religion has evolved to kind of make us into a group and to give us hope for the future, give us a place to perform rituals with other people that brings us together and makes us feel good, experience awe and all these other moral emotions and also good emotions. And so in general, he views religion as a benefit in that way. So there he argues against new atheists. And so finally, we get to his final definition of morality. Earlier, I think in the first video, we described morality basically as cooperation, but here he describes moral systems on page 314. Moral systems are interlocking sets of values, virtues, norms, practices, identities, institutions, technologies, and evolved psychological mechanisms that work together to suppress or regulate self-interest and make cooperative societies possible. So these systems are all about achieving cooperation, which is our definition of morality. And so, for example, with a psychological mechanism or an institution in this sense would be religion. So we can kind of see where an example of how a certain system can, in Haidt's view, help support us in our pursuit of cooperation. And so he kind of brings it back around to his political argument to kind of wind things down for the book. So on page 331, he gives liberal versus conservative narratives, basically what are ideological worldviews and how people interact with each other. So these are grand narratives of liberalism and conservatism. First off, for the left, once upon a time, the vast majority of human persons suffered in societies and social institutions that were unjust, unhealthy, repressive, and oppressive. These traditional societies were reprehensible because of their deep-rooted inequality, exploitation, and irrational traditionalism. But the noble human aspiration for autonomy, equality, and prosperity struggled mightily against the forces of misery and oppression, and eventually succeeded in establishing modern, liberal, democratic, capitalist welfare societies. While modern social conditions hold the potential to maximize the individual freedom and pleasure of all, there is much work to be done to dismantle the powerful vestiges of inequality, exploitation, and repression. This struggle for the good society in which individuals are equal and free to pursue their self-defined happiness is the one mission truly worth dedicating one's life to achieve. So that was the liberal narrative. The Reagan narrative, the conservative narrative, is this. Once upon a time, America was a shining beacon. Then liberals came along and erected an enormous federal bureaucracy that handcuffed the invisible hand of the free market. They subverted our traditional American values and opposed God and faith at every step of the way. Instead of requiring that people work for a living, they siphoned money from hardworking Americans and gave it to Cadillac-driving drug addicts and welfare queens. Instead of punishing criminals, they tried to understand them. Instead of worrying about the victims of crime, they worried about the rights of criminals. Instead of adhering to traditional American values of family, fidelity, and personal responsibility, They preached promiscuity, premarital sex, and the gay lifestyle. And they encouraged a feminist agenda that undermined traditional family roles. Instead of projecting strengths for those who would do evil around the world, they cut military budgets, disrespected our soldiers in uniform, burned our flag, and chose negotiation and multilateralism. Then Americans decided to take their country back from those who sought to undermine it. So, there isn't a libertarian narrative, but those were adapted from another author to describe how people view the world, how conservatives and liberals view the world. And basically, Haidt goes on to argue that in terms of politics and general political discourse, each side has some good points. We can concede that each side has some good points and would, in the grand scheme of things, actually win their argument on that point. And so basically, he's in this final part, he's synthesizing his overall point that really a lot of why we disagree politically is that we have become a part of these groups and we sort of value different things to some extent inherently, naturally, just because of our personalities and our developed personalities, which disallows us from really seeing the other side very well. And because we can't, we have this sort of, I'm going to bring Zizek into this, but an ideology, a way to frame the world, a way to view the world, and we try to then either fit political discourse into our own viewpoint or it's incorrect. And we justify our own decision that we are correct based on the social intuitionist model, his moral psychology research. And so what we really should be doing, and what this book is all about, this is why he wrote this book, is that we need to learn to understand each other, learn to understand that no, in fact, maybe I'm being ideological, maybe I'm being biased, and really try to take a step back and work with the insights gleaned from this book in trying to understand other people so there's not so much political violence, you could say. And so finally he concludes that morality binds and blinds. 366, he has a little something. His final summary before his actual conclusion that I think really summarizes his thoughts up well, says, morality binds and blinds. It binds us into ideological teams that fight each other as though the fate of the world depended on our side winning each battle. It blinds us to the fact that each team is composed of good people who have something important to say. So with that is the series on the righteous mind. Next up, I will be talking about John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism, which is, I'm reading right now and is harder to read than Moral Tribes and the Righteous Mind, but has been really enjoyable and really fruitful. And I think I think I'm going to sort of frame utilitarianism, the actual essay, as a response or support for both, or just a comment on both Moral Tribes and the Righteous Mind. There's more on Moral Tribes, which is why I decided to read utilitarianism next, but there is also an interesting mapping onto the Righteous Mind that isn't completely correlational, but there are certain aspects that I think are interesting to connect to the Righteous Mind. So hopefully I'll get the first video for that out next week. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.